So, speaking of the military and, of course, those on the front lines, we pause for a moment from the ongoing coverage of yesterday's terrorist attack to talk about another aspect of this. Our veterans, of course, our military, our service members go out and they write that blank check and they come home and they carry with them a great deal of skill. A younger generation, a more technologically savvy generations, many of the younger have grown up with technology, and even those that have been in the military for some length of time have had a transition to the technological era. So what about their futures and their ability to reintegrate into civilian work when they leave the military? That is an important aspect of our American community. Our retired Colonel John Buckley, military relations manager for Koch Industries, joins me now. Colonel, great to have you on the show, sir.
Morning, David. I'm honored to be on your show. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Well, look, it's important that we cover, all aspects of this. And one of the things that I've seen in a very encouraging thing that I've seen in the last several years is companies and associations that are working to, what I would say, reintegrate into the private sector using the skills of our service members when they become veterans. Let's talk about what you are doing at Koch Industries on this issue.
I sure will. And again, thank you for the opportunity. And for all your listeners, let me just say it's Koch Industries. It's spelled Koch to eliminate any confusion. And so as a military relations manager, I do two things principally. One is I help the Koch companies develop and execute their veteran recruiting and retention programs. And then secondly, I do a lot of coaching and mentoring of veterans who are looking for jobs coming out of the military. So in addition to that, and I think this is goes along your point of some great things that we're doing across the nation to integrate our veterans, we've created some education programs. Internally, we educate hiring managers and business leaders on the military culture. And then secondly, we also encourage and educate some of our veteran employees to participate in recruiting as well as integrating those veterans that we do hire.
And what are some of the important steps in this process? There are many service member families. Maybe there's someone looking at their next level, or service members themselves that listen to this show.
Some of the next steps, I think, David, you probably know this as well as anybody else being a Marine, have to understand and appreciate that there is a tremendous communication and, more importantly, cultural gap between our veterans and non-veterans. It's created when you consider that 93% of our citizens today never put a uniform on. So the cultural gap is further exacerbated by the culture that we have to embrace in the military, what I kind of call a tribal community, one where the success and the survival of the tribe is more important than any individual. And that truly creates some problems when the veteran starts looking into the private sector, which is a little more individual, more of an individual approach. So I think that's the first thing, and if the business leaders understand that and get away from some of the misperceptions of veterans, some of the misperceptions that we all suffer from PTS or that we don't have the initiative or we have to have a checklist, those kinds of misperceptions exist out there. So understand that there's a cultural gap and there's tools out there to educate yourself on that, as well as tools for the veterans to better acclimate into the private sector.
In that process, as someone looks at their, the period, usually about 30 days when they're, being out processed from their branch, what can they do and what are some of the things they should do, as a matter of fact, whether it's related even to Koch Industries or otherwise, but to make sure that they have a better transition? It's a difficult time. You've been moving around. It is a new world in many ways.
Well, in many cases, the transition process, especially in the transition assistance programs that exist, it can actually begin about a year out. But even though they may be educated on making that transition, how to write a resume, how to look for jobs, how to do an interview, those kinds of things, they're still focused on their day-to-day military mission. So there isn't a lot of effort. And really, I think the best thing that veterans can do to start, two principal things, is to really take a look at themselves and identify what is the correct career field to pursue. And the best way to do that is, secondly, to begin to network. Start talking to non-veteran employers across the country. Start talking to folks who have served in those particular career fields that they're interested in that maybe never served a day in their life. I did that extensively, and, humorously, I found two things coming out of that. First, I learned that I didn't speak English. I had a unique military language, and so I had to educate myself in the language of the private sector. And the second thing, it really helped me identify what was the correct entry point for me into the private sector. So those are two things that the veterans can do.
My guest, Colonel John Buckley, retired military relations manager for Koch Industries, KOCH, not Coca-Cola, the product. So I'll make that distinction, although I think many in this audience understand that. There's a reality here, and it's something I've even talked to college students about, but I think there's an application, at least a very similar principle. When you're coming out of the military, for the most part, not exactly the highest earning income status in the country, not as if someone transitioned into another job. So the real world that faces many, and as I've learned from many who have faced this issue, is that they, one, cannot necessarily relocate to where their skill set best applies. Maybe it's a particular state, a particular area, whatever the case may be. Maybe it's technology and you can't afford to live in San Jose or anywhere between there and San Francisco. You've got a family, you've got other issues with moving. Sometimes you're geo-locked to a certain area. So some hard choices come up, including having to take something outside of where you would like to be, but then working your way towards that. These are very complex issues for many, depending on your family situation, your economic situation, and even with housing allowances and other things. You're still not in that high income bracket, and sometimes that hinders your ability to move. Just address that for us.
Well, there are some tremendous challenges in that respect, and it gets complicated sometimes when the veteran takes a look at what his paycheck really includes while he's in uniform, and then he doesn't understand taxes. He doesn't quite, or she doesn't quite understand and appreciate how much Uncle Sam is going to take from your paycheck, whether it be at the federal level or even at the state level. So the veteran has to do that kind of a research. But David, the best thing, and I tell a lot of veterans this when I mentor them, is they have some unique skills and they have some unique abilities that will move them rather rapidly through the private sector. So it's okay to come in, and actually encouraged to come in maybe 1 to 2 levels down from where their current skills may be in the military. And through their leadership abilities, through their integrity, through their ability to think critically and creatively, solve problems, and more importantly, their loyalty to the company that hires them, they will move through the ranks, if you will, rather quickly, so that they can step up in society, relative to pay and career development.
Colonel Buckley, and I'll use an example in the 2 minutes we have left here. I worked with a private company to launch the VETS program, which is in the software and hardware testing arena. And Karen Ross, who founded this, put her own money, took a risk. Kudos to her. She's employed dozens. Actually, now I think we're getting probably closer to a couple hundred veterans that have careers, not just temporary jobs. One of the issues was that employers in the private sector do not understand the translation. You talked about speaking a different language, but also the translation of skill sets that apply to the private sector that are learned in the military. And they often think in corporate terms and don't apply that to, say, the ground pounder out there. But yet you learn a lot in the military. So to the private employers and some listening, what are some of the things they need to do?
Well, that's one of our major efforts in Koch Industries, and there are a lot of companies that do similar programs, in that we really have to educate those critical people, whether it be a recruiter and a hiring manager first, and then subsequently business leaders, on the military culture. Explain to them those soft skills that the veteran will bring so that you can leverage that and tap into that. One of the things too, I think, there's a lot of veterans who leave their first jobs, and one of the main reasons is it's an inappropriate culture fit. And the second reason is because companies don't show an interest in career development. So if companies know that going into hiring a veteran, they can address that in the onboarding programs, they can address that in their mentorship programs, and show an interest in their development. And I think you'll have a very loyal employee for many years, creating tremendous value for your company.
Colonel John Buckley, retired military relations manager for Koch Industries. Keep up the great work. We have much more to talk about in the future, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, David.
866